It was supposed to be just another quiet evening patrol, the kind of shift where the radio crackles occasionally but never calls for more than a traffic warning or a reminder to buckle up. Officer Daniels adjusted his rearview mirror, his fingers drumming on the steering wheel as he scanned the empty stretch of highway ahead. The sun had long dipped below the horizon, leaving the asphalt cloaked in that dull amber glow of sodium streetlights. A car ahead caught his attention, a late-model sedan, its taillight flickering intermittently. Daniel's instincts, sharpened by years on the force, kicked in automatically. A malfunctioning light could mean anything: a careless driver, a distracted commuter, or, in rarer cases, someone with something to hide. His hand moved to the siren switch, almost out of habit, and the patrol car filled with a pulsing blue and red rhythm that shattered the silence. The driver pulled over promptly. No hesitation, no erratic movement. Daniels appreciated that. Compliance always meant less tension. Still, as he stepped out of his car and approached the vehicle, flashlight cutting through the dark, he couldn't shake that faint prickle at the back of his neck. Something about the situation felt heavier than usual. He approached the driver's window. The man inside kept both hands visible on the steering wheel, his posture calm, yet alert. Daniels noted the details automatically. Clean dashboard, no visible contraband, driver's license ready before being asked. The man offered a polite smile, though his eyes carried a weight Daniels couldn't immediately name. "Evening, sir," Daniels said, his tone measured. "Do you know why I stopped you tonight?" The driver nodded, his voice steady. "Hail lights out. I've been meaning to get it fixed. Routine, predictable, safe." Daniels nodded, confirming the registration details, his mind half occupied with standard protocol. But then, as he glanced down at the name on the ID, something caught him off guard. The name familiar, too familiar. His breath hitched imperceptibly, and he read it again, slower this time, tracing each syllable as if his mind refused to accept it. The same name was listed in the case file sitting back at his desk, the file that had kept him up for nights. A confidential investigation into corporate misconduct, bribes, and missing funds. The same man he was supposed to locate discreetly. For a brief, suspended moment, the world around him seemed to narrow. The hum of passing cars faded into a distant echo, and all he could hear was the faint thud of his own heartbeat. What were the odds? He forced a neutral expression. "Sit tight for me, sir," he said, stepping back toward his cruiser. His mind raced as he replayed the coincidence. Was it really coincidence? Or fate's cruel reminder that control is often an illusion? Inside the patrol car, Daniel stared at the computer screen. There it was, the file, same name, same face. The man sitting calmly in the driver's seat was the very person he was supposed to be investigating. Not as a suspect, but as a key witness, someone who could break open a case that had already ensnared half a dozen high-ranking officials, someone who, if he disappeared, could topple careers, maybe even end them. Daniels leaned back, exhaling slowly. The rules were clear. When an officer recognized a connection to an ongoing case, the encounter had to be documented, reported, and handled with oversight. But in that quiet moment, paperwork was the last thing on his mind. What he felt wasn't just professional conflict, it was personal dissonance. Duty demanded detachment, yet everything about this felt unnervingly intimate. He looked back toward the sedan. The driver was watching him through the mirror, not nervously, not defiantly, just knowingly, as though he, too, understood the delicate balance that had just shifted between them. The stop had begun as procedure, but now it was something far deeper. A crossroads of conscience and circumstance. Daniels closed the laptop. His training told him to maintain control, follow steps, uphold order. But beneath the surface, his instincts whispered something else entirely. A quiet voice reminding him that sometimes the law isn't just about enforcement. It's about perception, compassion, and timing. The night air pressed heavy around him as he stepped out again, his flashlight trembling slightly in his grasp. This wasn't going to be a routine stop anymore. This was the beginning of something neither of them could have predicted. A moment where authority would meet accountability. and where every choice would carry unseen consequences. Officer Daniels stood beside the sedan longer than he needed to. The glow of his flashlight cast fleeting shadows across the driver's face, each flicker revealing more humanity than his uniform allowed him to acknowledge. The badge on his chest felt heavier than usual, as if it suddenly bore the weight of every decision he'd ever made in the name of justice. He had sworn an oath to serve, to protect, to uphold the law without prejudice or hesitation. Yet here he was, torn between the rigidity of regulation and the raw pull of empathy. The man before him wasn't hostile, wasn't evasive. In fact, he seemed almost resigned, as if he, too, carried his own invisible burden. "Everything all right, officer?" the driver asked, his tone measured but not fearful. Daniels hesitated before answering. "Yeah. Just verifying something." His words were flat, mechanical, the kind of response that masked thought with professionalism. But his thoughts weren't calm. They were racing through possibilities. Should he reveal that he recognized the man? Should he report the stop and risk the integrity of the investigation? Or should he let him go, pretend this never happened, and spare both of them the weight of what could come next? His conscience churned in the silence between them. Years on the force had taught him to trust instinct, but it had also hardened him against sentiment. Yet tonight that armor cracked. He saw not a potential informant, not a name on a document, but a man who seemed tired of being chased by circumstances larger than himself. The irony stung. Daniels had spent months tracing leads about corruption, double dealings, and deceit, all while believing he was standing on moral high ground. Now, face to face with the one person who could unravel it all, he felt his own certainty begin to unravel instead. He recalled his father's words. An old officer who'd retired before body cameras and media scrutiny changed everything. "Son, the badge is only as good as the heart behind it." Those words rang louder now than the sirens that had once guided his shifts. What did it mean to wear the badge when the truth tested the man beneath it? Was justice about following orders, or understanding why they mattered in the first place? Daniels exhaled, the tension in his chest tightening like a coiled spring. He wanted to do what was right, but the line between right and lawful blurred with every passing second. The driver's calm demeanor didn't help. It only deepened the ache of uncertainty. He could write the ticket. Simple, clean, procedural, no harm done. But doing that meant walking away from the truth, the kind of truth that could expose rot where order pretended to reign. The badge gleamed faintly under the streetlight. Daniels stared at it, remembering the pride he'd once felt pinning it to his uniform. Tonight, it no longer felt like protection. It felt like judgment. His radio crackled, dispatch checking in, but he didn't answer. For the first time in his career, silence felt more honest than protocol. The ID in his hand suddenly felt heavier than paper had any right to be. Officer Daniels stared at it under the soft glare of his flashlight, each letter etched with unnerving familiarity. The name wasn't just familiar, it was engraved in his memory, a constant echo in the case files and internal memos that had haunted his recent weeks. This was no coincidence. The man in front of him was directly tied to an investigation that had already strained his sense of duty to its limits. He looked up, meeting the driver's eyes again. They weren't the eyes of a stranger. They were calm, perceptive, almost expectant, as though he already knew Daniels had discovered something significant. A flicker of unease crawled through Daniels' gut. Every cop was trained to recognize patterns, to follow intuition, but what he felt now wasn't instinct. It was realization, sharp and unsettling. The world seemed to shrink around that single moment. The hum of distant traffic, the rhythmic pulse of the patrol car's lights, the faint whisper of wind brushing across the asphalt. Everything blurred into a surreal stillness. Daniels's mind replayed every briefing, every conversation, every warning about keeping the investigation quiet. And now, right here on this quiet stretch of highway, the man he was supposed to find had appeared, not as a name on paper, but as a living, breathing human being. He tried to steady his breathing, hiding the jolt of recognition behind the mask of authority. "I'll be right back with you," he said, voice flat as he returned to his cruiser. His pulse drummed faster than he wanted to admit. He shut the door and sat in the blue-lit silence, staring at the ID again. It was him. The witness who had vanished weeks ago. The man who'd been in the crosshairs of both the department and the very people the department was supposed to expose. Daniels thought of what that meant. This driver wasn't just another person to ticket or caution. He was someone carrying knowledge, the kind that could shift entire narratives, destroy reputations, and reveal truths that people in power didn't want seen. If the reports were true, he'd gone into hiding out of fear. And now fate had placed him directly in front of the one man who could either protect him or deliver him straight back into danger. He sat still for a long moment, letting that truth settle like dust in the air. His job was to follow procedure, run the name, confirm details, alert his superior. But something inside him resisted. He thought of the department's growing list of lost evidence and accidental oversights. He thought of the pressure from higher-ups to close the case quietly, to let the trail go cold. The investigation was supposed to reveal corruption, but sometimes corruption lived in the very hands holding the files. Daniels looked out the windshield. The driver sat patiently, his profile calm against the backdrop of passing headlights. That calm unnerved him. It wasn't defiance, it was acceptance, almost as if the man knew this meeting was inevitable. Daniels remembered the photograph from the file. A man in his early 40s, former financial auditor, rumored to have blown the whistle on his own company before disappearing, the missing link. The one witness no one had been able to reach. He swallowed hard, his thoughts tangling in a quiet storm. What was he supposed to do? Radio it in and hand him over, knowing that the system might chew him up before he ever spoke a word? Or break protocol and give him a chance to tell his side? To survive long enough to do it? The badge on Daniels's chest gleamed faintly under the console light. It had always represented order, safety, truth. But tonight it felt like an anchor, something pulling him deeper into a moral undertow he wasn't sure he could escape. The job demanded loyalty to the rules, but conscience demanded loyalty to truth, and the two had never felt so far apart. He stepped out of the car again, his movements deliberate, his expression neutral. The driver didn't flinch as Daniels approached. "Is everything all right, officer?" he asked again, voice calm but edged with curiosity. Daniels hesitated. His instinct urged him to speak carefully, but honesty pressed against the back of his throat. "You ever think," he said quietly, "that sometimes people end up where they're supposed to be, even when it doesn't make sense?" The driver's lips curved slightly, almost into a knowing smile. "More often than you'd think." In that moment, Daniels realized this wasn't just another stop. This was the kind of encounter that stripped away the illusions of uniform and authority, exposing something raw and deeply human. Every belief he'd held about justice, order, and control trembled under the weight of that realization. The man before him wasn't simply part of an investigation. He was a reminder that behind every case number, behind every report, there lived a story of someone who had once trusted the system and been broken by it. The silence that followed was dense, almost sacred. Daniels felt something shift inside him, a quiet breaking, a surrender of certainty. He wasn't sure if it was the beginning of clarity or the unraveling of everything he thought he knew, but it was real. The night that had started as routine would now haunt him in ways no badge or training manual could ever prepare him for. When Daniels returned to his cruiser, he didn't open the laptop again. He didn't need to. Every instinct screamed that the man sitting in the other car wasn't just a line in a report. He was a living intersection between duty and morality. And Daniels was standing directly in the middle. He leaned back against the seat, staring into the night. The hum of the idling engine filled the silence, steady and mechanical, almost mocking his indecision. He could end this now. Call dispatch, report the encounter, hand over control to the system that had shaped him. But something deep within whispered that doing so would erase a truth that deserved to survive. He opened the glove compartment and pulled out the file he wasn't supposed to have in his car, the confidential case dossier he'd been studying on his own time. He flipped through the pages until he found the same name, same photograph. The notes were messy, rushed, lines of crossed-out theories and scribbled suspicions. Every piece pointed to the same conclusion. Someone inside the department had been feeding information to the very network they were supposed to dismantle, and this man, this driver, was the only person who could prove it. Daniels stared at the photo again, then looked toward the sedan. Same face, same eyes, and yet something about seeing him in person, quiet, composed, patient, made everything harder to reconcile. He wasn't supposed to feel empathy. Empathy complicated duty, but empathy also reminded him that justice without compassion was just power disguised as virtue. He thought of his sister, the one who'd lost her job years ago after uncovering unethical practices at her company. He remembered how she'd been silenced, labeled difficult, made to disappear in paperwork while the guilty walked free. She had once told him, "The truth doesn't need permission to exist. It just needs someone brave enough to listen." Those words echoed now, slicing through the fog of his thoughts. He realized that this wasn't just a case. It was a mirror. A reflection of every silent compromise he had made, every rule he had followed without question. And now that reflection was staring back at him, waiting to see which version of himself he would choose to be. He stepped out of the car again and approached the driver's side window. The driver rolled it down slowly. "You found something, didn't you?" he asked softly, as if reading Daniels' hesitation. Daniels didn't answer right away. He studied the man's face. The calm beneath the tension, the quiet fear masked by control. Finally he said, "You're not supposed to be here. Not like this." "I could say the same for you," the man replied, "but maybe this is the only way either of us gets to do the right thing." The words hit harder than Daniels expected. He looked down at his reflection in the window. Uniform, badge, gun, symbols of authority that suddenly felt fragile in the face of truth. He realized the investigation wasn't just crossing into personal boundaries, it was dismantling them. It was forcing him to see the humanity that existed beneath procedure, the fragile thread connecting justice to mercy. Daniels took a step back, trying to collect himself. The night around them felt denser now, filled with the weight of unspoken choices. He knew that whatever he decided next wouldn't just affect the man in the car. It would change his own life, his career, maybe even the meaning of the badge he wore. He looked once more at the driver, who met his gaze without flinching. In that silent exchange, something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, or mutual understanding, that the lines between right and wrong were rarely as straight as the roads they traveled. The air between them felt weighted now, not with threat but with something quieter, heavier, harder to define. Daniels stood beside the car door, the light from his flashlight casting long, distorted shadows that stretched across the asphalt. The driver's face was half lit, half hidden, and the strange balance of light and darkness seemed to mirror everything Daniels felt inside. He had been trained to see the world in clear lines, lawful and unlawful, threat and safety, truth and deceit. Yet tonight those lines were dissolving before his eyes. What he saw wasn't a suspect or even a witness. What he saw was a man, tired and wary, who carried truths too dangerous to speak aloud. Daniels felt it, that undercurrent of fear and restraint that no amount of calm composure could fully disguise. "Do you believe in justice, officer?" the man asked suddenly, his tone calm, conversational, but edged with something sharp. Daniels blinked, caught off guard by the question. "Of course I do," he replied automatically, though his voice lacked conviction. The driver nodded slightly. "That's good. But sometimes justice isn't the same thing as doing what you're told, is it?" The words cut deeper than he expected. Daniels had heard countless people talk about justice, in courtrooms, in precincts, in news clips, but never like this. Not from someone sitting behind a steering wheel, not from someone who had nothing to gain by saying it. He found himself searching for a reply, but couldn't form one that sounded honest. Justice, the word felt different now, heavier. He had spent years chasing it, believing it was something that could be enforced, a set of rules to uphold. But here, on this silent roadside, justice felt more fragile, more human. Maybe it wasn't about punishment at all. Maybe it was about recognition, seeing the truth in front of you and choosing not to turn away. Daniels's gaze drifted toward the badge pinned to his chest. It had been a source of pride once, the tangible proof that he was part of something bigger, something righteous. But now, under the dim orange light, it looked more like a mirror reflecting his uncertainty. He thought about all the faces he'd encountered over the years. People who had looked at that badge with fear, anger, sometimes even hope. He wondered how many of them had seen the man behind it, and how often he had remembered to see them. He felt the edges of his conscience pressing inward, tightening around him. He thought of the endless training sessions, the policy handbooks, the reports filled with precise, sanitized language meant to make human choices sound procedural. But nothing in those pages had ever taught him what to do when right and wrong blurred into the same breath. The driver's eyes softened. "You're not a bad man," he said quietly. "You're just standing where the rules and the truth don't line up." "I've been there too." Daniels felt something twist in his chest. Not guilt, but recognition. They weren't so different, he realized. Both caught in systems larger than themselves, both trying to make sense of choices that refused to fit neatly into definitions. The night grew quieter, and the hum of the patrol car became the only sound. Daniels found himself speaking without fully thinking. "You are supposed to be unreachable," he said. "No one knew where you went." The man gave a faint smile. "Sometimes the safest place to hide is in plain sight." Daniels studied him for a long moment. There was courage in his calmness, but also sorrow. The kind born from too many disappointments, too much loss. He wondered what it must have cost him to come this far, to carry secrets that powerful people would rather see buried. He realized that his choices tonight weren't just about law enforcement. They were about morality, empathy, and the simple act of seeing another person as human first. Justice without humanity was mechanical. Humanity without justice was chaos. The balance between the two, that fragile, sacred balance, was what the world constantly failed to maintain. For the first time in a long time, Daniels felt his sense of purpose shift, not dissolve, shift. Maybe justice wasn't about catching the bad guys or closing cases. Maybe it was about protecting what was good, even when it didn't fit the rules. Maybe it was about the courage to listen before you act, to think before you judge. He took a slow breath, the cold air filling his lungs, clearing his mind. The man sitting before him wasn't running anymore. He wasn't resisting. He was waiting to see if there was still something human behind the uniform staring back at him. Daniels felt the weight of that expectation press into him like a silent plea. He knew he couldn't walk away unchanged. The tension wasn't just professional now. It was deeply personal, woven into the fabric of who he was. And as he stood there, the idea of justice began to mean something entirely different from what he had been taught. The silence between them was no longer just silence. It was an electric current, humming with decisions that neither of them dared to make. The flashing lights painted the highway in alternating strokes of red and blue, bathing both men in colors that felt like warning signs of what could come next. Daniels could feel his pulse quickening, the rhythm of it pounding in his ears. Every heartbeat seemed to echo a question he wasn't ready to answer. He looked at the driver again. The man hadn't moved, hadn't spoken. His hands still rested calmly on the wheel, but Daniels noticed the faint tremor in his fingers. Subtle, but there. Not fear, exactly, but restrained. The effort of holding still when everything inside screamed to move. "Step out of the car for me," Daniels said, though even as the words left his mouth, he wasn't sure why he was saying them. The man obeyed quietly, opening the door, stepping into the cold air. His movements were measured, deliberate, the kind of careful choreography people learn when they understand how easily things can go wrong. They stood facing each other now, two figures on the side of an empty road, separated by years of training, by rules, by expectations neither fully trusted. The world felt smaller here, condensed into the space between their breaths. Daniels's hand hovered near his belt, not in threat but in instinct. The driver noticed but didn't react. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," Daniels said, his voice low, steady but strained. "I'm not the one making it hard." the man replied. "You are." The words landed softly, but they carried weight. Daniels felt his composure falter for just a second. He wasn't used to being confronted like that, not by defiance but by truth. The man wasn't challenging his authority, he was challenging his certainty. The radio inside the cruiser crackled faintly, a reminder that he wasn't alone in this moment, even if it felt like he was. Protocol demanded he check in, report his position, state the nature of the stop. But protocol had lost its clarity hours ago. He couldn't bring himself to move, couldn't break the fragile tension holding the night together. He took a step closer, lowering his voice. "You know who I am." "Yes," the man said quietly. "And I think you know who I am too." That was the moment the air grew heavier still. There it was. Acknowledgement. No more pretense, no more guesswork. Just the truth, hovering between them like something dangerous and sacred. Daniels's throat tightened. Every instinct screamed to maintain control, to assert authority. But authority felt meaningless now. The man before him didn't look like someone running from guilt. He looked like someone carrying the burden of truth. And Daniels could feel that burden pressing into his own chest, creeping beneath the armor of his uniform. A truck passed by in the distance, its headlights briefly illuminating the scene before plunging them back into half-darkness. Daniels's heart pounded harder. The night felt alive, vibrating with choices that couldn't be undone once made. He thought of all the moments in his career when decisions had been easy, when laws were clear, when motives were obvious. But this wasn't one of those moments. This was a collision of purpose and perspective, and he wasn't sure which would survive the impact. He could arrest the man, bring him in, follow the rules. But deep down, he knew that would deliver him back into a system that might destroy the very evidence he risked everything to reveal. And if that happened, justice would lose again. Not to criminals, but to bureaucracy and fear. Daniels realized he wasn't just standing on the side of a road, he was standing on the edge of his own beliefs. And the fall was dizzying. The badge on his chest no longer felt like armor, it felt like a question. He could feel sweat gathering along his hairline despite the cold. His hand twitched slightly, a sign of nerves, not aggression. The driver's gaze stayed fixed on him, steady, unreadable. For a long moment they said nothing, yet everything that needed to be said pulsed silently between them. Finally, Daniels broke the silence. "You're risking a lot being out here." "Who are you?" the man replied. Those words lingered in the air like smoke. Daniels felt his heartbeat slam once, twice, echoing through his chest. It wasn't fear anymore, it was realization. They were both standing at the intersection of truth and consequence, each waiting for the other to move first. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself, but the night only pressed in tighter. Every sound seemed amplified. The rustle of wind through the grass, the faint hum of electricity in the distance, the steady rhythm of his heart pounding against his ribs. He understood now that this wasn't just an encounter, it was a test, not of authority but of integrity. A test of whether he could see beyond the uniform, beyond the paperwork, beyond the version of justice that demanded obedience over understanding. The man looked at him, not with defiance but with quiet resolve. There was no plea in his expression, no demand, only a kind of patient recognition. Daniels realized that the man had already made peace with whatever would come next. The question was whether he could. The lights from the patrol car flickered against the blackness, casting both of their shadows across the empty road. The red and blue flashes merged for an instant, forming a momentary wash of purple, a fleeting symbol of two worlds colliding, two truths trying to coexist. Daniel's heart beat faster still, the tension within him building with every pulse, every breath, every second that refused to end. Daniels's radio crackled again, breaking the fragile stillness, but this time it wasn't a routine check-in. A coded transmission came through from dispatch, an update on the very case he'd been working. His own investigation had been compromised, names were being leaked, and a warning went out to all officers to be cautious of false informants. His pulse surged. The name mentioned in the transmission was the same as the man standing before him. For a moment his mind couldn't process it. Not suspicion, not confirmation, just disbelief. He looked at the driver, really looked, and the calmness on the man's face told him everything. The witness hadn't vanished because he was hiding from justice. He had been hiding from the department itself. Daniels felt the floor of his certainty give way beneath him. Everything he had believed about the case, the internal reports, the evidence, the leads, was a smokescreen. The truth had been manipulated, and the man before him wasn't just a piece of the puzzle. He was the proof that the system was protecting the wrong people. The revelation cut deep, sharper than guilt, colder than fear. Daniels realized that the real danger wasn't outside the department, it was inside it. The man's voice was calm when he said, "Now you understand why I couldn't come forward." Daniels felt something inside him unravel. A tight knot of years spent believing the badge guaranteed moral clarity. He saw now how easy it was to follow procedure without ever questioning who wrote it or why. The man before him wasn't guilty. He was a casualty of a broken structure. Daniel thought back to all the times he had looked at people through a lens of suspicion first, compassion second. He could see it now, how judgment had become instinct, how detachment had been mistaken for professionalism. But tonight stripped all that away. He wasn't an officer looking at a driver anymore. He was a man looking at another man caught in the machinery of power. The silence between them no longer felt like tension but understanding, fragile and real. The driver gave a faint nod, as if acknowledging that Daniels had crossed an unseen threshold. For the first time, Daniels didn't see a suspect, a file, or a duty. He saw a story, one that demanded to be heard, not controlled. Daniels stood in the glow of his patrol lights, realizing that power wasn't in his badge or his authority. It was in the choices he made when no one was watching. Trust, he saw, was more fragile than law. It was built in moments like this, on roads where no supervisor could dictate the right answer. The line between right and wrong blurred before him not from confusion but from clarity. He finally understood that sometimes the hardest thing a person can do is see the truth and not turn away. The man's eyes met his, steady and unflinching, and Daniels felt time stretch thin around them. The night hummed with quiet consequence, every second charged with unspoken decision. For once words failed him, replaced by something more honest, understanding. The flashing lights reflected off the man's face, and in that reflection Daniels saw not guilt or innocence, but humanity staring back at him. The camera lingers on the final image, the echo of headlights fading into the dark road. Before the music swells, soft at first, then rising with a pulse that mirrors the emotion of the story. The screen transitions to the A1 Storyteller logo, illuminated against a backdrop of slow-moving clouds. A visual cue that this story was more than entertainment. It was a reflection of choices, of conscience, of humanity. A calm yet resonant voice speaks. Every story has two sides, but only those who look closer find the truth beneath the surface. If tonight's story made you feel something, if it challenged you, moved you, or reminded you of what it means to be human, don't let it end here. A quick montage flashes, a gloved hand tapping subscribe, the notification bell chiming softly, the like button glowing with a subtle pulse. The narrator continues, the tone deepening with conviction. Join the A1 Storyteller community, where stories meet soul and every twist carries a truth. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and be part of a growing circle that values meaning over noise, depth over distraction. The visuals shift to short glimpses of past stories, intense moments of revelation, emotion, redemption, each cut timed to the music's rising tempo. Your voice matters here. Tell us what moved you most in the comments. Was it the choice he made, the truth he uncovered, or the moment you saw yourself reflected in the story? Share your thoughts, because every comment adds to the conversation, and every conversation builds something greater. Gentle pause follows, the music softening, leaving room for sincerity. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, stories that touch the heart, spark reflection, and reveal the hidden sides of humanity, show your support. Tap like, share this video with someone who needs to see it, and help us keep these narratives alive. The outro closes with the A1 Storyteller emblem glowing softly against the dark screen. The final line lands with quiet resonance. A1 Storyteller, where every story has a heartbeat, and every heartbeat tells a story. Then the music fades, leaving only the faint echo of a single heartbeat before the video ends, urging the viewer to stay, to connect, to comment, to return for the next chapter.